Welcome back on board the Starship. Now, in last week's show, I screened a discussion which took place in Newcastle upon Tyne after a talk that I had been giving. And since then, I've had quite a lot of correspondence from people who would like me to give similar talks in their area around the UK and then possibly have a discussion which could be screened. Now, in order to do this, I'm very keen to do this, we need suitable venues. And the requirements for a venue are firstly that the venue is free, secondly that the venue seats around about 100 guests, and also we prefer venues with a bar. Also, we would need access during the day to set up, and then we would give the talk and the discussion on the evening. So if you're keen for me to come to your area and put on such an event, I'd like to hear from you. So if you know of a venue, get in touch via the website, which is richplanet.net. I'm talking with Ben Emlyn-Jones. Now, we mentioned Dean Warwick, his tragic death at the Probe conference. Now, one of the things he was talking about before he passed away was the Ian Huntley case, because he was convinced that Ian Huntley is innocent. Mm-hmm. Now, I researched this recently, and I was amazed to find there's a lot of evidence to suggest that he was innocent. Yeah. You know, there were people who cited the two girls after he's supposed to have murdered them, more than one witness, none of whom were called at the trial. There was no DNA evidence on the shirts that were found. I mean, the list actually does go on and on and on, but this program is not about that particular case. But I did hear that the real perpetrator of that crime, the murder of Jessica and Holly, was it Jessica yes. and Holly? It was actually carried out by an American serviceman, because there was an American base near where they lived, and the whole thing was that it was a matter of national security, because we were actually getting ready to go to war in Iraq at that time, and if it had been revealed that an American serviceman had come out of one of their bases and killed these two children, that would have then made people question the whole ethos of us having American bases in the UK, which would have created real national security issues, which is why they framed him. Now, this is the theory. They framed Huntley because they needed a scapegoat to get the police off the scent. And apparently there is an American serviceman who is doing time in a military prison for their murder. Yeah. So this is the rumour. I mean, would you care to expand on any of it, Ben?
I actually I've heard from several sources the kind of thing that you're saying concerning Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr. I myself remember very, very clearly watching the news coverage on TV when they were apprehended and tried, how unusual and strange and sort of unprofessional actually the media were regarding this case. People in Soham reported there were cameramen everywhere in the town, and the tone of the coverage was not so much that of a crime as some kind of celebrity scandal.
Yes.
The coverage really, I mean, if you read things such as tabloid newspapers and you watch the TV, I kind of really feel that Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr were tried, convicted and imprisoned by the media long before they even got into court. Yeah. How can someone have a fair trial when there's this sensationalising going on? Yes. Now, as for framing them, I mean, you know, the motive is clear, which you just described, to avoid a scandal. I mean, the government wouldn't hesitate to carry out this kind of duplicity and send an innocent person to jail for the sake of
national security.
Yeah, national security, and looking, you know, avoiding embarrassments and scandals. Especially, as you say, it was a very, very tense time. They're about to go to war with Iraq. This is really scary because it could happen to any of us. Any of us could be fall victim to this. If we're in the wrong place at the wrong time, it could be us in jail and us being demonised in the media.
People would say, well, why did he confess, etc., etc. Now, it is alleged, or people have alleged or suggested, he spent time in a military hospital, I believe, and some people say that his mind was messed with. He was programmed to say those things at the trial, and he was deliberately picked out because he had a few misdemeanors in his past, so he seems a likely candidate. Yes. The other thing was that there was a jogger who alleged to have seen two burial mounds. I think he phoned the police. The police spent all night investigating them. Now, people say that the bodies were actually buried there, and that which is why the two shirts that were found at Huntley's school had none of the girls' DNA on it. They'd been set fire. They had petrol poured on them, and they'd set fire. No DNA on there. The reason, this is the conspiracy theory. The reason for that was because if they had been buried under the ground for several days, they would have had, soil in them. So it would have been obvious that the bodies had been buried. So they couldn't use the real football shirts. Yeah. So they had to get new ones, which is why they didn't have any of the girls' DNA on them. And that was one of the main pieces of evidence, that he took these shirts and he put them in a bin in the school that connected him with the murder. But the whole thing of him admitting to it was, what people say is, he was programmed. He was mind controlled.
Yeah, he had a psychological assessment.
Yes.
As many murder suspects are, and that could mean anything, including drugs and hypnosis. And I mean, mind control is real. It has been researched. This is actually conspiracy fact, not fiction. Mind control actually does exist, and it's still kept going on today. It's perfectly possible that he was drugged or programmed in some way to confess. Also, I mean, the planted evidence, it looks very planted when someone sort of burns stuff, but usually when people burn things, they burn them properly. They don't half burn them so that it's obvious, so they can still be recognisable for what they are. Yeah. Like these shirts were recognisable for what they are, but they were half burnt. It's a very it's a powerful psychological statement. They're saying, well, look, these are the shirts, we found them, and he tried to burn them. So we have the act of burning and recognisable shirts in the same shot, so to speak. When really it should have been either one or the other. The shirts would have been either unharmed, or in which case, no effort would have been made to destroy them, which wouldn't incriminate him so much, or they were burned properly, so there were no shirts, just ash.
And I recommend anyone who's sitting at home thinking, that's crazy, I read it in the paper that Huntley was guilty. Do your own research, go and find out, and don't get your information from mainstream media sources. Do your research and find out about the Huntley case, because there's a whole can of worms with this. And you can see the motive of why they would do it is because if an American serviceman was found guilty of murdering those two girls, the whole philosophy of us having American bases in our country will be brought into question. And that's why it was considered national security. Now, you mentioned that this guy who's allegedly is currently serving time in a military prison had done this before.
Yeah, there was a young girl, before a young Japanese girl was murdered on the island of Okinawa, which is one of the Japanese islands. There's a big American air base there, and this man, who's in the US Air Force, was stationed there at the very same time this girl was murdered, just like Holly and Jessica were.
And he was stationed at the...
He was stationed at that base at the time
where Jessica and Holly lived.
Yeah.
All right. Now, if this is a miscarriage of justice, it's not the only one, is it, Ben, that's took place in the UK?
Definitely not, and there's some very famous cases of people being convicted, and it looks very much like they were framed in the same way that Ian Huntley, we believe, has been. And a good example, the best example, is the Birmingham 6 and the Guildford 4, who were arrested and tried and imprisoned in the 70s following the terrible bombings of the pubs in Birmingham and Guildford. It came at a time when the government was under a lot of pressure to be seen to be acting effectively against the IRA problem.
Yes.
People were terrified that they wanted the government to do something. The government needed some kind of coup, some kind of success that they could point to and say, yes, look, we've done something. So they basically, as the Pogues song go, the Pogues song about it, they picked up some guys for being Irish in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yeah, yeah. As the Pogues song says. Yeah. And basically what it means is that the real perpetrators of these attacks are probably still walking scot-free today, laughing their heads off. Yes. While these guys did, 20 years in jail, and were demonised, and
I mean, that brings us to the subject of false flag terrorism, which I've covered a lot on this show. The 7/7 bombings and the 9/11. I mean, what are your thoughts generally on 9/11, Ben?
There is no doubt in my mind that it was an inside job perpetrated by the government. It's really, the evidence is overwhelming, and more people are coming around to this idea. Even famous people, celebrities, movie stars and people like that are saying it on TV. And I really respect those people for doing it.
Yeah.
It's only one of many examples of false flag terrorist operations. And this is the point. It's nothing new about it. It's a very, very extreme example, but there are other incidents such as the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty, the burning of the Reichstag. It actually goes back to the time when there's a Great Fire of Rome in about 2,000 years ago, yeah, where Rome burned while Nero fiddled, which you could say, which is kind of what George W. Bush was doing on the day that the Twin Towers were struck. So, I mean, it's basically a scam that the governments use a lot, and they will carry on using it until it stops working, basically until we get wise to it. And when these things go down, we don't just immediately believe them when they point to these nasty boys on TV saying, guys with beards and hats and...
Well, it's happening now with the inquest with 7/7. That was they were reporting on that just the other day, and it is never being mentioned on mainstream media that the 4 Muslims were quite possibly innocent and have not been proven guilty at any court. But the newsreader reads it out. The terrorists bombed the tubes. It's stated as fact, but nowhere has that been proven at all. Yet they state it on their news. So, I mean, how do you feel about the media, Ben? And it's because in your introduction we said that you were interested in media manipulation. I mean, can you expand on that?
Yeah, it's the announcement, on the news when they call something terrorist when it's factually not proven is another example of what Ian R. Crane calls myths without the negative connotation of the word myth. In other words, people believe something and they think it's true, but they don't objectively know it's true. Yes. I despise the mainstream media. I think it's one of the most terrible weapons ever perpetrated on the human race. Yeah. I do everything I can to uncover its various massive machinations and the violence it uses against our minds. Yeah.
Hello again, hospital porters and civilians alike. I've just seen Richard D. Hall do his lecture here at the Leeds International UFO Expo. Basically, he was talking about the media, the media's relationship with us and the UFO issue and the other suppressed technology. And like Anthony Beckett, he talked about he talked about Mars and the planets, and like Andrew Johnson, the anti-gravity device. He believes, he's spoken to people like Stan Deyo, and he showed a video of Stan Deyo. And Stan Deyo has written a great book actually called A Cosmic Conspiracy. It's worth seeing. It does show beyond doubt that there is an elite group of multinational power brokers who exist above national governments, and that democracy is a con. It doesn't matter who you vote for, because you're only voting for the public relations officer of that government. People like John Perkins in his Confessions of an Economic Hitman show this. He explains how the powerful countries like the United States took over the poorer countries. They play divide and rule with each other. I mean, JFK was assassinated because he wanted to end the power of that elite. He wanted to break up the Federal Reserve. He wanted to, decimate the CIA, return it to its constituent parts, end the power of the bankers and the media moguls. And Richard explained the media. He explained how the MI5, the security agencies, actually recruit prominent media operators like newsreaders. I mean, we don't know how many has been recruited by them, but we know one man who was attempted to be recruited by the MI5 and he turned them down. That was Jon Snow, the newsreader. Good for him. He was offered, like they say, we'll double your salary. No questions asked, cash in hand, the taxman never hears anything. And Jon Snow said, no thanks. But you look at the other people on like Gavin Esther, Jeremy Paxman, all these other people, John Simpson, Nicholas Witchell, how many of them said yes, I wonder? There's no way of knowing because there's no paper trail. And sceptics are always criticising us for saying never producing a paper trail. Well, in conspiracies there are no paper trails by definition. Really, Richard's point very much was that 9/11. He talks all about 9/11, his latest 9/11 research. Now, 9/11 is the clue to disclosure. If anything about 9/11 comes out, then everything about UFOs will come out. Now, I I don't agree with him there, and I'll explain why later on in this film. You know, I consider the disclosure is, like I say, is another matter. I mean, 9/11 is probably the second biggest secret in the world. Richard described it as the biggest psyop in history. Certainly a big one, but there are bigger ones, and I will explain as time goes on exactly what that is. You know, it was a really, really good interview, and Richard's a great guy, and his research is excellent. He's a level-headed, scientific type of person. He doesn't regard UFOs as something connected with the rest of the paranormal. He's not into the other paranormal things. I am, unlike him, but he sees them as separately, as a separate issue in a sense, you know. And well, he's partly right, I think.
So, I mean, what do you think the man on the street can do about it if we're being lied to? What would your message be?
I would say to anyone, you know, who is not familiar with these subjects, is to make yourself familiar, to use your mind and think, or you know, stop believing what's on TV. Start reading alternative sources, and then, you know, use this information to change your life.
Yeah.
Become a free person. You don't have to fight back at the system with violence. You just have to stop cooperating with it. Yeah. And because at the end of the day, these all-powerful bad guys who rule us, you know, are actually not powerful. They actually play a passive role. It is we, the people, who have the power. The government's illusion of power comes from the fact that we don't act on our power, and we sort of just do as they tell us. You know.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to go for another short break, Ben, and we will be talking about UFOs when we come back. So don't go away.